6:06 p.m. on January 20th, 2022, the meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Mountain View Westman School District is called to order. Do you want me to say it again? Okay, it's 6:06 p.m. The January 20th, 2022 meeting of the Mountain View Westman School District Board of Trustees is called to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, trustees. May I have roll call, please?
Devin Conley,
Chris Chang.
Ellen Wheeler,
Laura Berman,
Laura Blakely. Let the record reflect that all 5 trustees are present. I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda, but we need to pull under consent item 2G. So a motion to approve the agenda with item 2G pulled from the consent piece.
do we need to take public comment on the agenda before we make a motion?
Thank you, Trustee Conley. Are there any members of the public attending who would like to speak about the agenda? If so, please raise your hand or press *9 if you are participating in Zoom by phone. Seeing none, may I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. The motion made by Trustee Conley and seconded by Trustee Chang passes unanimously. Okay, we will move on to consent. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on an item on the consent agenda? If so, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 if you're participating by phone. Seeing none, may I have a motion?
I move that we approve the consent agenda minus item G as in Gary.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, on a motion made by Trustee Wheeler and seconded by Trustee Berman, the consent agenda with item G pulled was approved unanimously. Okay, now we're moving on to communications. Are there any members of employee organizations here this evening who would like to speak to the board? If so, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 if you're participating by phone. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Are there any members of district committees here this evening who would like to present comments to the board? If so, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 if you're participating by phone. Okay, seeing none, we are moving to item 3C, the superintendent's comments. Dr. Rudolph, do you have comments for us this evening?
Yep, got a couple of comments. So first one is Spanish interpretation is available for this meeting. If you're using Mac or PC, click on the globe at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you're on an iPhone or Android, it is in the options menu. Hay interpretación a español disponible para esta reunión. Si está usada una Mac o una PC, haga clic en el globo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom. Si está en iPhone or Android, está en el menú de opciones. So just real quick, we figured that y'all would not pass the following resolution. So staff went ahead and decided to write our own resolution. So we're going to break form just a little bit in the recognition of School Board Recognition Month. So just want to read this real quick and then I'll pass down. We got you a little something, and then also We have framed copies of the resolution for y'all. So whereas an excellent public education system is vital to the quality of life for all California citizens and communities, and whereas our public education system has faced unprecedented circumstances this past year as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and whereas our local school boards acted immediately to ensure our children's academic, social, emotional, physical, and mental health needs continue to be met at a time when students needed consistent services most, and whereas school board members continue to push to do more with less to serve the children in our community each and every day. And whereas local school board members are committed to children and believe that all children can be successful learners and that the best education is tailored to the individual needs of the child. And whereas school board members work closely with parents, educational professionals, and other community members to create the healthiest environments possible where all students can thrive. And whereas school board members are responsible for building and maintaining the structure that provides a solid foundation for our school systems, and whereas school board members are strong advocates for public education and are responsible for communicating the needs of the school district to the public and the public's expectations to the district, and whereas the mission of the public schools to meet diverse educational needs of all children and to empower them to become competent, productive contributors to a democratic society in an ever-changing world is more poignant than ever. Now, therefore, I, Allende Rudolph, do hereby declare my appreciation to the members of the school board and proclaim the month of January 2022 as School Board Recognition Month in the Mountain View Westman School District of Santa Clara County, California. I urge all community members to join me in recognizing the dedication and hard work of local school board members and in working with them to create an education system that meets the needs of our students.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you so much. That's very touching.
so we have a couple items. If you can take one. Pass that down. There you go, Laura. This. Then, make sure you choose the one with your name. So it's Colin. This is Christmas. Alex. Laura. Should be in order. So just keep passing down. Pass. This is yours, Laura.
This
This is Devin
I'm passing that to you.
Conley.
That goes to Alan.
He's doing it in order.
Thank you. This is CJ.
Thank you so much.
All right. Oh, don't. So, staff went ahead and you can open up the box real quick. Just a small little token of appreciation. Again, thank you for all that you've done during these trying times. We know it's really hard, but we wanted to take a moment to recognize y'all for the work that you do.
Can I say that in 20 years of being on the school board, this is the first time that this has happened. It's very nice.
Thank you for,
Thank you.
people want to see what their nice plaques that say making a difference. Dr. Rudolph, and to all of the staff, we're very grateful
Very nice.
to work with you and are touched by your appreciation.
You need to pull your microphone closer, Mr. Blakely.
I just said, sorry, my too many things on my desk. I said thank you to Dr. Rudolph and to each member of the staff. We truly appreciate you and are just very touched by these gifts. So thank you. I don't know if any other trustees would like to express their appreciation.
It's just incredibly kind and unexpected. And thank you.
So were there any additional comments, Dr. Rudolph, that you wanted to make this evening?
Just the last thing is that we have our community check-in. Tomorrow we'll be sharing with the public a lot about volunteers and as well as sort of the next phase. So starting on February 1st, staff will be opening up the volunteer process. School sites are going to be talking to ELAC, site council, as well as presidents, to talk about sort of what types of volunteers. I know yesterday in the PTA meeting when I talked, the PTA president, or the president of the PTA president group mentioned that, having parents help with things like even doing the rapid testing. So then, principals are going to work to sort of really identify sort of what the process is and what type of volunteers they're looking for. As I told the PTA presidents, there's still some areas of concern. And so we need to take it slow and sort of build some success. And that it won't look like it traditionally looked where people are just in and out, but it is a step forward. And then even with that, we've classified there are 3 different types of volunteers. And then the other piece of this is that will also allow PTAs and other groups to use classrooms if they need to. Obviously, district-led groups, ELAC, site council, anything that's subject to either the Brown or the Green Act will still follow the board protocol of limiting outsiders. But if a parent organization wants to meet after hours and use a room because it'll help facilitate better work, we'll do that. The thing that we ask is that we're mindful that we still have kids on campus. We have a lot more kids on campus than what we traditionally do. And because of that, we need to make sure that we're, as adults, are sort of walking on campus after hours, that they keep themselves sort of somewhat away from kids. We still have 44% countywide, according to the last data I looked like for ages 5 to 11, but we're 85% for all adults. So it's, obviously Omicron can be spread, and we've seen cases where you're vaccinated. So we're just trying to be mindful of those types of things. So that's really a big step for us. And we'll be talking about a little bit more. And obviously more information is going to be coming out. But I think, as long as we take it slow and we keep it safe, it'll definitely be a move in the right direction to try and create a new normal.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. I know a lot of parents will be happy to learn about the positive steps taken and that they will be able to volunteer again. So that's great. Great news. I hope it goes smoothly. Okay, we will move on to item 4.
Can I ask, we've got a community comment from Sean Dector, and I don't know where or when that comment would be appropriate.
So if y'all could just pull the mic just a little bit closer. So I've turned up loud enough that if you can hear yourself in the feedback, that that you're broadcasting good enough for the YouTube channel. So it's okay for you to move it, and it
So
picks up. Yeah, there you go.
what I just pointed out to President Blakely is we have a community comment hand from Sean Dector, and I don't know where or when that hand went up and what agenda item it's for, but I wanted to make sure you saw that.
Thank you, trustees. We did already pass the time for employer organizations to speak, but if you're willing, we could take Mr. Dector's comment now and then move on to the community comments on non-agendized items. Thank you. Mr. Dector, if you would like to speak to the board, will you please, you've got your hand up. I'm not sure what the step is on Zoom. To unmute.
All right. Hello. I apologize for not finding the raise hand feature a bit sooner. I really did want to speak during my section.
That's fine. We're glad you're here.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, Board of Trustees. First, I do want to say thank you for your service to our district, and I just want to echo what Ayende said. I also wanted to talk on a more serious note. I'm here tonight to express our teachers' deep disappointment in our district's unwillingness to negotiate the articles that were open during our contract negotiations. Our negotiating team presented multiple ways that our district could work to reduce the overwhelming workload that teachers have been experiencing year after year in our district. The suggestions to revise the contract to try to recenter teachers' time and focus on high quality teaching rather than administrative and safety tasks range from free of cost to moderately expensive. The district team rejected all suggestions and refused to offer any solutions of their own. When presented with evidence of the impossible workload that teachers are experiencing, the only response was, "We disagree." When given evidence of our district's poor track record with teacher retention, they returned with their own numbers, citing pride in a new teacher turnover rate that tops out at 20%. To give you a comparison, districts in Santa Clara with a more positive relationship with their teachers have turnover rates in the single digits. Over the past several months, we have provided you with testimonials and evidence from teachers citing our 60, 70, and sometimes 80-hour work weeks, just so we can accomplish the myriad of administrative tasks that have been piled on our plates, all while planning and collaborating time has been eroded by forcing teachers to take on the brunt of the substitute shortage and our district's refusal to hire enough yard duty staff to keep students safe at each site. This is not a money issue, though it is sad for our teachers to see that our district would like to compare with San Jose school districts like Alum Rock, Franklin McKinley, and Oak Grove, just so they can say we are at the top of the pay scale, when we clearly are not. It is also sad to see that the district is willing to offer more money to MVA only if we stop complaining about the working conditions our teachers are experiencing. The issue is that our teachers do not feel that we have a place at the table. Our concerns are shrugged off with a simple, "We disagree." Our suggestions on improving our schools and enhancing our students' education fall on deaf ears. Teachers have learned not to ask questions at the school site and district level because questions are discouraged and left unanswered. We ask the board to give guidance to our district administrators to stop saying "we disagree" and to start listening, to work with our teachers, to consider our suggestions for improving our schools and our district, to treat us as professionals, to allow us time to teach our students, and finally, to offer a fair salary increase that the district knows that it can afford, but refuses to give because teachers won't sign a 3-year contract that does not address the very real problems in our working conditions that will not disappear by just saying "we disagree." Thank you for your time tonight, and I hope things change in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Dector. Okay, now we will move to the item number 4 for community comments. This is the time reserved for community members to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board and administration welcome this opportunity to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action on non-agenda items. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak to the board this evening on a non-agenda item? If so, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone if you are participating by phone. Okay, I do not see any members of the public wishing to speak on non-agendized items this evening, so we will move on to item 5, review and action. And item A is the security camera community feedback, board policy 3515, and administrative regulation. And I believe is that Dr. Westover will be presenting to us this evening. Good evening, Dr. Westover.
Good evening. Let me share my screen. And then some of this is a repeat from the previous 2 presentations that I gave. So some of the repeat slides, I'll go through fairly quickly, but if you'd like me to slow down on any of them, please just let me know. So tonight, we're coming back to you to present the board policy, which you saw during our last board meeting, as well as administrative regulation. So our guiding principles, similar to the last few presentations, connecting it back to the strategic plan and goal area 5, and our master facility plan, which guides all the work that we do for Measure T. I also included a summary of the feedback that we received from the community as well as from our school site. So we had a robust community and school site feedback process where we sent out postcards, social media, put up posters at all of the school sites to let the community outside the school, as well as the community within the school, know about these feedback sessions that we were holding. And then each of these we've tried to address either through our board policy or administrative regulations. Looking at the project and process overview. So our security camera project is estimated to cost $2.9 million across the district. And then we talk through kind of when we've had input points for our master facility plan, which also included public input. We talk through the project list and when we reviewed the project list in public board meetings, as well as when the project list came back to the board to be updated or to report out on the progress on projects. And then,
Dr. Westover, I think you froze.
oh, thank you. Is it any better?
You're back. Oh, you were back.
I noticed if it keeps happening, please let me know and I'll switch to my iPad because it doesn't seem to happen with my iPad. Then we came back in October, walked through our community feedback process and outreach. And then on January 6th, we reported out on that feedback and then proposed a board policy. Then here we are today asking the board to take action on the policy and possible administrative regulations. Then staff will come back to present schematic design, cost and timeline and budget of the project prior to commencing. And we're hoping to install in the summer of 2022. So this is the same summary of the board policy that we went over previously. So I'm going to flip through these slides since the board policy was included in the board packet and also reviewed during our last board meeting. There was one change that we made from the suggestion of Trustee Berman of having, sorry, it skipped, having the language may or may not be actively monitored by school personnel. So that was updated language from the last time we reviewed the board policy. A summary of the administrative regulations. So I will go over this because this is new to the board. We will provide prior written notice annually to students and parents, guardians about the district surveillance system. This will include the sites where surveillance may occur, recordings may be used in disciplinary proceedings, matters captured by their surveillance cameras may be referred to local law enforcement as appropriate under board policy or required law, and that a recorded image of an identifiable student that is directly related to a student and maintained by the district is considered a pupil record. We may show security surveillance recordings to the following entities without parental consent, subpoena, or court order under the following conditions. I'll let the board read through these conditions, but really this is in order to protect student safety, and it outlines why specifically we would release this footage. So for truancy purposes, if we're concerned about something involving the violation of a condition of probation, or to protect the health or safety of a pupil or other person. An image depicting a pupil if the pupil has been kidnapped or if there's an emergency which requires that this information protect the health or safety of the pupil, and school resource officers assigned to a particular school with expressed approval from the superintendent and or designee with an event related to a crime, or it depicts a situation consulting with a health or safety emergency. And this outlines why we would monitor a live feed. For example, there's a dire emergency present. The incident creates a clear and pressing danger of physical harm or injury. The incident or threat is ongoing and continuing in nature. the nature of the incident is of such magnitude that an immediate call for law enforcement or other public safety personnel presence is warranted. And then monitoring of live video shall only be in the presence of the superintendent or designee and public safety personnel. And then I wanted to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Westover. Are there any trustees with questions for Dr. Westover on the security camera regulation and policy? Trustee Conley?
Is the administrative regulation the area that would document how long we would maintain those video records? I know that was something that we discussed at our previous board meeting, but I'm not sure that I saw it in the administrative regulation itself.
Yes, so in the specific text of the ARs, I didn't include it in the summary. We had discussed 30 days. So we have it listed as no more than 30 days.
Did you find it, Trustee Conley? Are you?
I can pull it up and tell you.
I'm looking, I did read through the administrative regulation previously, and I'm missing it.
Page 4 for the AR 3515. So on page 4 of the PDF.
Destruction of records. Okay, thank you very much.
I thought I saw it, but
Yep, thank you.
any additional questions for Dr. Westover? Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? If so, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone.
So we have a live stream issue on YouTube. So we're going to go ahead and record it and then upload the recording a little bit later.
Okay, so I'll just repeat. If there are any members of the public who would wish to speak on the security camera, community feedback, board policy, and administrative regulation, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing none, trustees, do you have any comments to make about this policy and regulation? Trustee Conley?
I would just note that we had an incident, was it a week ago, where 2 children were spotted lighting a fire on campus against the building, and it looked like they had also messed with some of the sprinkler valves. They could have been trying to set the building on fire. So, and then it sounds like in Los Altos, there was a similar incident a few days later where they did successfully light a bigger fire. So I think that there's unfortunately a clear and demonstrated need for this.
I would agree, sadly. Other trustees? Trustee Berman?
Make a motion that we approve board policy 3515 and administrative regulations 3515 as presented.
Second.
All in favor, please.
Oh, sorry.
Trustee Chang?
Yes, just another comment, and which is fine. So we can have the second continue and just.
Before we take the vote, you can make the comment. Sure.
So I think Trustee Connolly to the second. Thank you.
Can you speak up a little bit? I'm
Yeah,
sorry, we are
so
having trouble
all of
with
us,
this.
the microphones were kind of having some audio, all of us here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a comment to that. You know, I was thinking about what Trustee Connolly said about these. We've been having a lot of these like little security things, and then there's all that news, but you know, there's people doing social media kind of driven pranks on campus, and like I'm looking forward to cameras being a deterrent so students or adults or anyone on campus thinks twice and makes a better choice. In addition to that, in addition to the cameras, I do hope we also use each of these incidences that have been happening as like education moments, because like as an educator, I think to myself like catching them after they've done it is like the worst way to do it, right? It's like if something happens where we can talk to the community about the harm that vandalism causes, you know, the harm that some of these pranks, that they're kids, right? The kids don't often think about the full repercussions of what they do. So the degree we can, because that's something that policies don't catch, right? Like policies are there for the worst case scenario, but then on the education front, this is happening often enough that I hope that we proactively talk to the kids about just about being how to take care of our community and the consequences of their actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Chang. So on the motion made by Trustee Berman and seconded by Trustee Conley, may I have a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, the motion carries. The motion made by Trustee Berman and seconded by Trustee Conley passed unanimously. Okay, and now we are moving along to item 6, review and discussion, local control accountability plan timeline, spring 2022. And Ms. Bauer, I believe you are speaking to us this evening. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees. I'll share my screen. I'm going to be just giving you a quick update of our timeline for the development of the local control accountability plan over the course of spring 2022. So as you know, we have our new strategic plan that guides our work, and we've been intentional about ensuring that our LCAP aligns to our strategic plan. Both of the next 3-year cycles will align to SP 2027, which makes sure that our district initiatives and work is focused and targeted. Just as a reminder, the local control accountability plan, or LCAP, is a 3-year plan that explains our goals and strategies for improving achievement for students. Our goals must address the 8 state priorities, and we must develop a budget that matches spending to the goals in the plan. The LCAP package includes several documents: the budget overview for parents, the actual LCAP, the annual update, the federal addendum, and this year we'll also include something new, the supplement to the annual update. Oops. The supplement is required by AB 130, and we have to present what they say is an update on the annual update. And so what we'll be doing is at the February 10th meeting, we'll be bringing you this supplement, and there's 5 narrative prompts that we'll respond to. We'll provide an update on our mid-year outcome data related to our metrics and our LCAP, as well as our expenditure information and implementation data on our actions in our LCAP. The supplement will be the only item included in the LCAP package in June. So this is just an overview of the prompts. Really, the prompts are designed for districts to explain how they were using funds that were provided through the Budget Act of 2021, because some of those funds were given to districts after the development of the LCAP. These are just the 8 state priorities. Our current LCAP contains 5 broad goals. Each goal is aligned to one of our goal areas in our strategic plan. And our goals and actions align with our budget. And just as a kind of a reminder, the LCAP is revised every year, and again, aligned to our strategic plan, so it guides our work. Apologize. These are our goals. You can see they're very similar to the goal areas in the strategic plan. And this is our timeline. So we're at the beginning of our process now. Our annual LCAP survey will open on January 31st. Schools will be presenting the timeline to groups over the course of January and February. We'll be coming back to you on February 10th with the supplement to the annual update. And then in March and April, we'll be working to draft the annual update and work on the new LCAP based on the data that we receive. And then our plan is to have our draft due in April, post for comments in May, and then bring the LCAP back to you in June for final approval. So our next steps is we're working on the supplement currently. We're going to work on publicizing our LCAP survey as we get closer to it opening on the 31st, and then begin work on drafting our annual update and our 2022-23 annual LCAP. And if you'd like to learn more, there's the link to where you can find all the information. And with that, I will stop sharing and take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bauer. Trustees, do any of you have questions for Ms. Bauer about the LCAP timeline? No? If there are any members of the public wishing to comment on the local control accountability plan timeline for spring 2022, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone if you are participating by phone. And I see that we have one hand raised. I believe it's Mr. Nelson. Please unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes. Oh, do we need to get the timer up? Okay, there you go.
There I go. Thank you, President. Yes, I wanted to make a comment that the LCAP and the development of it is an important thing that is done, that is also supposed to include our language minority parents in the process. And since this is an important item, I do hope that the district is going to do the proper translation into Spanish that is needed for these items before English parents are given the documents. I hope that there's a simultaneous translation, a release of the written documentation that's going into the draft, so that the members of the ELACs are the majority of members in ELACs, because there are some other languages that are represented, can fully participate in this community process, a community process that's supposed to include people who are of minority language status. And in this district, that's primarily Spanish. That's the language that some schools are required by civil rights acts to translate their documentation for parents into. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Trustees, would anybody like to comment on this item? Trustee Conley.
I would just like to say how much I appreciate the alignment between the LCAP and the strategic plan. And I think it makes our work more effective as a district overall to have that congruence. And thank you, Ms. Bauer and your team, for all of the hard work that goes into this process every time.
I also hope it makes the work of Ms. Bauer and the team more, what am I trying to say, consistent or just streamlined. Any other comments from trustees? Well, Ms. Bauer, I echo everybody's sentiment. We appreciate all the hard work that went into it, and we look forward to moving on with the process this spring. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at 6:50, the meeting of the Mountain View Wisman Board of Trustees is called back to order. And we will move on to item 6B, the iReady Diagnostic 2 Assessment Data Overview. And I believe Ms. Dagar is presenting to us on this evening. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good evening, trustees. A great pleasure to be here this evening to share our iReady Diagnostic 2 assessment data from December. I'll share my screen in a minute. As I do that, 1 second here. It's obviously tied to our strategic plan, goal number 1, which is effective and consistent instructional practices that meet the needs of all of our students. As I start with this, with the data overview presentation, you may have heard me say that behind every data point is a story. And with analyzing our data and studying the trends, we really get a glimpse into our successes as well as our opportunities for growth. How are we doing as a school district? How are we doing as a school site? What are some things we really need to celebrate with the mid-year data that we have? And what are some instructional next steps that we can decide on based on what we see? This is an expansive report because we started with having a macro level view of district-wide data. Then we went into using a comparative across the diagnostics with the data. Then we went into comparing across the year diagnostics at this time across the 3 years. And then we've broken it down into comparatives across diagnostics and years by subgroup, and then the granular level of school level data by subgroups as well. In the upcoming slides, you will see how that most of our students that we've made proficiency gain from August diagnostic to December diagnostic. And we have seen that and you'll see that our younger learners are making more growth. There's an 11% improvement from August to December. But what's more important to note over here is there's a 7% reduction in students that are 1 grade level below and 5% reduction in students that are 2 grade levels below. So the yellow and the red has reduced and the greens that we see in Tier 1 has improved. Here what we see is all schools have made improvement. The next couple of slides, we see a lot more green, a lot less red and yellows. What we do see in the upcoming slide is a proficiency change right here. We see that Montaloma across the diagnostics from August to December has made 17% growth, while among our elementary schools, we see Castro has made 8% growth. As we move into our middle schools, we see Graham made 5% proficiency gain and Crittenden made a 7% proficiency gain. This slide here in front of you shows a comparative across 3 years. So December 2019, which was in-person administration, to the virtual administration in December last school year, and then this school year, December in person. We wanted to get an idea of what the trend looks like. So we do see it's pretty comparable district-wide. So 61, 2019, December, we went up to 64 in December 2020, and then we went down slightly this last December in 2021. We do see that Bob Montaloma and EMI have shown continuous growth through the 3 years at this point, mid-year. Some schools show more fluctuations in proficiency than other schools. Here we have our middle school. We see similar data trends, 55, 57, 62 for Crittenden, and 61, 59, 62 for Graham. So pretty comparable there. What you see now is comparative by grade level. We do see lower grades, kinder first, made more gains in proficiency than upper grades. Here is our upper grades, and we see the lower grades have more proficiency gains. Looking at the 3-year comparative, kindergarten has the most drop from last year to this year. Because we see a 61% proficiency in December 2019, and in 2020, an 82% increase, and then we see a drop to 69. Whereas our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, we see improvement in their proficiency from last school year, December, to this year in December. Next couple of slides are comparing subgroup data. This is December diagnostic that we just had. We do see that our EL students with disabilities and socioeconomically disadvantaged students show least proficiency district-wide. A lot of numbers over here, so I will try and point out as much as I can, but we see that Crittenden and Graham have 1 to 2% EL proficiency as compared to elementary schools that have a higher proficiency for our ELs. And something to think about as we're thinking of instructional steps. EL, it's much like a moving target. So we know that each year represents a different group. We reclassify students, so a lot of things to consider. Here we're seeing a comparative of from the August diagnostic 1 to December diagnostic 2, our subgroups. We see that all of our subgroups district-wide have made gains. We do see that our ELs grew 8% and our SED only grew 5%. What we're seeing now is comparatives of our subgroups through the 3 years. And we see that there's a change in proficiency as we went to Word 12 last year and then came back to in-person. Our ELs went up and then they went down. But we still see that from December 2019 to December 21, we have improved proficiency from 11 to 16%. We do see that our FEPs, if you notice from December 2019, that was in-person to this in-person administrations, our RFEP students have made growth. But from last year, Word 12 to this year, same proficiency, just interesting data trends to look at. We see a slight drop in our SED students across the year. Here's the ethnicity subgroup data, and we can see that there's gaps in our ethnicity data. We see 29% of our Hispanic Latino students district-wide that are proficient. This is our middle school data. As we compare and look at, you again see 38% at Crittenden, 29% at Graham. Here's a comparative of ethnicity subgroup across the diagnostics this year. We do see all of our subgroups have made growth, and we see our Hispanic Latino students made 7% proficiency gain. As we move on to the 3-year comparative, it shows both Asian and white student subgroups made growth or stayed the same across the years. But we see a slight increase in and then a drop in the proficiency for our Hispanic Latino. So from 32 to 34 to 29. The next few slides that are the next slide, the earlier slides that we have cover a lot of school data. So I'm going to include all of that. And in the interest of time, I'm going to include and capture the data analysis in the upcoming section that is successes and opportunities. Overall, we, like I mentioned, we've seen in the previous slides as well, that most students are proficient in December 2021, which was this December, compared to the beginning of the school year and the last in-person administration that we had in December 2019. Our lower grades, kindergarten and first grade, we see most gains across diagnostics. We do know that our younger kiddos benefit most from in-person instruction, right? The interaction between teacher and students and that structure of a school day, well, getting the instructional expectations from their teacher versus over a Zoom call or on a screen is a totally different, it's totally different, and we see that they've made most gains. When we look at by-school data, we see all of our schools have made growth from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2. But we do see Bob, Imai, Montaloma consistently making growth from August to December this year and across the 3 years. And in my personal conversations with coaches, with site leadership, some research-based strategies that we see at schools that show success over the years there's been a continued focus on quality first-time instruction during the core ELA block. What we teach the kids first time around, what is that most meaningful? How are the kids learning best? And then something that we see a lot with the schools is also an intentional and consistent focus on priority standards. What is most important? How do we maximize time? How do we pull out skills from within the standard that are our priority standards and most important for students to be successful through the years as they go through our schools? Also, the schools use multiple formative data points, such as exit slips, quick check for understanding, and they use this to drive small group instructional support. What am I going to teach my students today? And also to design the RTI groups. And then as students keep rotating, check for understanding, exit slips, simple assessments that teachers may have designed, very helpful in designing their small group and RTI time. By subgroup, when we compare and look at some successes, we see that all subgroups have made improvement across diagnostic and across the different school years, except a slight decrease in our socioeconomically disadvantaged students across the 3 years. Our ELs at Stevenson, Bob, Vargas, Imai, and Montaloma made double-digit growths this year. That means that language practice is working, something that they're working towards with their teachers, that interaction really benefits our in-person interaction, really benefits our students. Our Hispanic and Latino students at Thurkoff, Vargas, Imai, and Mistral, they made double-digit growth across the diagnostic this year too. Students, socioeconomically disadvantaged students in Thurkoff and Stevenson also made double-digit growth this year. So what are some things that we see are working in these schools with subgroup data? A very intentional focus on language development and practice, constantly vocabulary introduction, review, development, keeping that cycle going, not just teaching vocabulary one time or introducing it and letting it go, having a review and bringing those words back again and again so students can retain. We know research has shown that our ELs, and I'm an EL myself, that they have to be exposed to a word about 3,000 times for it to stay, giving them opportunities to keep practicing the new words. The next thing we have that we know works at the schools that are using it, that are showing improvement in subgroups, is consistent use of targeted EL instructional strategies, using PSYOP as a way. What about some opportunities for growth? We see overall we've made growth, but we still have 36% of our students that are below grade level. We have work to do. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders on middle schoolers didn't make as much progress over the years or across the diagnostics. By school data shows that our Landals, Mistral, Castro, and Thurkoff have a decline in proficiency from December 2019 in-person administration to this year. We see a steady decline in proficiency for Landals in reading across the years. And then when we look for subgroup across diagnostic, our ELs at Crittenden and Graham declined in proficiency. If you may remember, I'd pointed out Graham was 1%, there's a 1% decline in Graham and 2% decline for Crittenden. That all of those slides are available in our presentation support materials, but in the interest of time, I didn't want to go through every one of them. We also see that ELs at Mistral have shown least amount of growth among the elementary schools. We see a 3% growth with students and EL students at Mistral. Our Hispanic and Latino students at Stevenson only made 1% growth when we pulled our reports. SED students at BUB show a decrease in proficiency as well. A 2% drop is what we saw. And at EMI, they stayed the same at 29%. So pretty flat over there with our SED students. When we're looking at overall, this required Hispanic and Latino students and SED students, they decreased in proficiency across the 3 years. We see Hispanic Latino students at Castro are only 12% proficient, but they made a 6% growth. So we do see that is there. At Castro, we need a little more intentional effort there to utilize our additional support so we can help mitigate all of the multiple challenges that we know are identified by the data and that distance learning has exacerbated for our student population. When we look at across schools, we know there is a need for intentional focus and subgroup data and using this data to plan for next instructional steps. What do our students need? Being intentional about each and every one of the lesson planning that we may have to support our student groups. Being intentional and consistent about front-loading vocabulary, as well as practicing those vocabulary application activities. Remember, I said ELs and 3,000 word exposure, keeping them in loop in continuous vocabulary activities. One and done doesn't really help. And we also need to focus on the use of priority standards so that we can keep reviewing them. What we do at the beginning of the year may need to be reviewed again in about a month, may need to be brought back again now. So a plan for review of priority standards, and using the language structures to promote language proficiency, giving students opportunities to speak with small group, with each other, present in class, and giving them that understanding and support in language usage. At our middle schools, there was a need for implementing an additional focus on small group instruction. I was just talking to one of our middle school coaches this morning, and they are doing this intentional work, and they intend to continue doing that. That's not only in RTI, but also in core classes. We do see that our differentiation PD, now that we've had 2 sessions in August and in January, how are we using that learning for differentiation PD to support all of our students in the core classes, because they're at different levels as well. So we have some work to do, as well as celebrate some successes. As we move on, we have some math data. Again, overall, we see math proficiency improvement. You will see that in math, we have district-wide more growth than in reading. So here we are. The comparative for math from Diagnostic 1 to Diagnostic 2. We see more growth district-wide, as I said, than we in reading. So there's 11% growth in reading, but we do see more growth, 15% proficiency improvement for our students in math. As we see this, we also see all of our domains in math, we have improved. You see more green again, right? Less yellow, less red, but more greens, which is a good thing. All 3 tiers were making growth. This is by school comparative. Again, we see a lot, all schools have made improvement from Diagnostic 1 to 2. Well, we see more tier 1. Like I mentioned, and we also see less red in tier 3 and less yellows, so which is good. Here's a diagnostic comparative. We see, like I mentioned, all proficiency, all schools improved in proficiency. We do see Montaloma made the most growth with 25% proficiency change from Diagnostic 1 to Diagnostic 2, and Castro made an 8% growth among the elementaries. Crittenden, we have 8% proficiency improvement, and in Graham, we have 6%. Looking at a 3-year comparative now, we see same proficiency district-wide. It's very interesting, 57, 57, 57. In a way, it's we see that we haven't really gone down, but definitely we want to make sure we continue our work to improve our proficiency and have less kids below grade level. We see crests and troughs, or some drops, some more than the others across schools. For Vargas, Stevenson, and Landals, we see that. Montaloma and EMI, they show continuous growth. Castro has plateaued again. We see 13% across the 3 years for proficiency at Castro. We have our middle schools here. As we move on, we see Crittenden and Graham have comparable proficiency to pre-pandemic year, right? As we compare our math by grade level, we see lower grades, much like reading, lower grades show more proficiency growth. Kindergartners made 21% growth, and our 3rd graders made 22% growth from Diagnostic 1 to Diagnostic 2, August to December. Interestingly, in 2nd grade, we had a 13% of our students who are 2 grade levels or below. So they've improved. The red has reduced by 13%, which is really good. Moving along to see our middle schoolers, we don't see a lot of reduction in students in tier 2, 3, that is red and yellows. Here is a comparative by grade level across the 3 years. You may remember earlier in my reading slides, I was talking about kinder making big spikes, younger grades. We see a similar trend here with our kindergartners. The virtual administration we saw went up from the previous year, and then we see a drop again. A similar trend for math here, just like reading. As we move on to our subgroup data, we see overall our data shows that all subgroups are doing better in reading than in math. And somehow it just comes to my mind that our SED, socioeconomically disadvantaged students, are at 19% proficiency district-wide in math, but in reading they were at 24%. Which is the largest, this is the largest difference among subgroups between the two subjects. Here's Crittenden and Graham. We see SEDs here at 29% proficiency at Crittenden, and Graham has comparable to the district 19%. Looking at comparatives for subgroups from diagnostic 1 to diagnostic 2. We do see all subgroups made growth, but ELs, students with disability and students with disabilities made single digit growth, so 5% and 9%. When we look across the 3 years, we see from last year, December 2020 to December 2021, most subgroups either stayed stagnant or improved, except for ELs that went down from last year. So they were at 19% for virtual administration, and ELs went down to 14%. But again, we see ELs that were last in-person administration in December 2019 was 12% proficiency. We see an improvement at 14% this year. So there is a slight improvement for our ELs here. Interestingly, we also see RFEPs. They went down in math for virtual administration by 1%, but then they moved up by 54%. So from December 2019 to December 2021, we see an improvement in RFEPs as well. Here's a comparative for our ethnicity subgroups. In the next couple of slides, you will see it by school and district-wide. We see most Hispanic Latino students are proficient at EMI, and you'll see in the next slide at Crittenden at 30% proficiency. We know that EMI and Stevenson also have the least amount of Hispanic Latino students enrolled. EMI has about 48% students that are Hispanic Latino, which is 11% of their population. Stevenson has 38, which is 8% of their student population. Crittenden, on the other hand, which we see over here, has with their Hispanic Latino, 30% proficiency, right? They have 222 Hispanic Latino students, which is 41% of their population. Just interesting data trends to see, and keeping in mind the number of students at each of the sites, right? Now looking at across diagnostics from August to December, our Hispanic and Latino students improved 10%. All of the ethnicity subgroups made improvements. But when we do a 3-year comparative for our ethnicity subgroups, we do see a drop in proficiency for Hispanic Latino. So the December 2019 in-person administration and December 2021, we see from 25 to 21%. So a drop for Hispanic Latino students. When we do a comparative by math pathways for our middle schools, you will see both our middle schools are here side by side. We do see in the next couple of slides, you'll see our 0.2 and 0.1 target, 0.2 and 0.1 pathways are pretty much on target, but we definitely have work to do to improve proficiency at both our schools with our grade level math pathways, math 7 and math 8. We see less proficiency there. Here is a comparative for 3 years, and we see a slight drop in our 6.2 students, But since the number of kids is so much, 1 or 2 students as well make a big difference here. But we do see an 11% improvement here for Math 7. So when we look at Math 7, we do see our students have improved, and we also see a 4% improvement in our Math 8 from December 2019 to December 2021. So there's good that we're seeing that in having students back in person is helping them be more engaged. Both 7.1 and 8.1 have improved double digits from December 2019 to December 2021. As we move on, this is Math Pathways for GRAM across the 3-year comparative. We see 7.1 pathway making an 18% improvement in proficiency. Yes, you heard that right. It's 18% from December 2019 to December 2021. That is some great improvement from 60% to 78%. We also see that a trend that higher math pathways have maintained or are on target with proficiency. Math 7, we see improved 4% from diagnostic to December 2019 to diagnostic to December 2021. And Math 8, we see declined, so 8% to 4%. So what are some successes and opportunities for growth? Again, as I go into this, I've captured all the school data by school data as best as we could in our successes and opportunities. Much like reading, we do need to have a focus on priority standards. But what does the data really tell us? We have more students proficient in across diagnostics, and we don't see a decline over the years, which is a good thing. It's all 57%, but we need to see growth. Kindergartners, first graders, and third graders made most gains across our diagnostics, lower grades. First grade proficiency improved across the 3 years. So they kept on improving even with virtual or in-person administration. When we look at our by school data, we see all schools made growth, which should be because students now have gone through the school year and have more understanding of this grade level standards and are better able to respond. They're also kind of reorienting back after more than a couple of years, a year and a half actually of distance learning. So it's making a big change. We're seeing that it's helping our kids grow. Bob, Imai, Vargas, and Montaloma showed improved proficiency across diagnostics from August to December, as well as across the 3 years. We do know that schools that show this success over the year, again, much like reading, what are some things that they're doing that we know are practices we could use? Continued focus on priority standards, using formative data, exit slips to guide which students need what support and in what standard. And how do we keep moving and having a rotation for small group instruction? And RTI groups, how do we keep restructuring them as students move and get mastery of standards? Also using formative data to guide one-on-one instruction, like which student needs what support. Where can I pull in some time, 5, 10 minutes a day with one of my students who really needs help in this standard that I taught 2 months ago? Really using those formative data points. Another thing that we know has in our conversations has come up is giving students opportunities for math application. What we know from our curricular study, how do we apply it? That's what really builds and helps get better understanding of standards. And some schools, for example, use a program called Beast Academy to enhance problem-solving skills, it is much like a comic-based math program. It really helps students think about, what do I know about this problem that I can use and apply to solve it? Some other successes are by subgroups and across diagnostics. We see district-wide, our ELs and Hispanic Latino students have improved proficiency. Our ELs at Vargas have made most growth in math, 25% proficiency growth. And in reading, if you may remember, Vargas had 19% proficiency growth. So our ELs at Vargas are doing well both in reading and math. In math, Hispanic and Latino students at Montaloma have shown most improved proficiency, 22% gained across the diagnostic from August to December. But in reading, Hispanic and Latino students at Montaloma improved only 4%. Interesting data point to look at. Math was 22% proficiency gain and reading was 4% improvement. So what are some things that we need to do from this data to help guide instructional next steps? Although we have to say that Montaloma has Hispanic and Latino students have in math 28% proficiency, and in reading overall they're 29% proficient. Our socioeconomically disadvantaged students at Stevenson made most growth, and so did the students with disabilities at Thurgoff. Things to celebrate, but also to look at what's working with subgroup data, with subgroup and in these schools. They have a focus on math vocabulary development. Again, reviewing what does it mean when we say addition? What does it mean when we say how do we apply this problem into a computational problem into a real world application problem? And what are some vocabulary words that we can give to our students to use across that they can use for summative assessments? Use of quick check for understandings, like I mentioned, exit tickets, questions, quick polls that help target instruction. As students walk out for recess, having them tell you an answer to a quick problem, and how many of my kids do I need to pull back when they come back from recess for a quick lesson and a quick review to make sure it stays with them. Adjusting our lesson pacing so that we can build in time for review and practice. And of course, a focus on our priority standards. Moving along, some other opportunities that we have for growth. Overall, similar to reading, we see even though we've made growth, 42% of our students are still below grade level. So what do we really need to do to bring this proficiency up for math? Similar to reading, our middle schoolers, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders didn't make as much progress across diagnostics in over years. They did make growth. We didn't make as much as our lower grades. When we look at by school data, Castro, Crittenden, and Graham made least improvements across the diagnostics. But we know Landals, Mistral, Vargas, Thurgoff also declined in proficiency from December 2019 to December 2021. Mistral and Thurgoff had a steady decline in proficiency across the 3 years as well. In math, but in reading, it was interesting because we saw a slight increase for both schools and then a drop. So what happens? What do we need to do? How do we use this data to plan for math instructional support? When we look at by subgroup data across the diagnostics from August to December, ELs at Graham and Mistral declined. We do see Castro has least proficiency for Hispanic Latino students. And I apologize for the little typo over there. SED students at Mistral, Castro, and Landals also made the least growth. Continuing with our subgroup data, we do see that Hispanic Latino students decreased in proficiency across the 3 years. We have work to do with this subgroup of our kiddos. And across all pathways for both our middle schools, there is a need for intentional focus on using our data protocols to design the core lesson as well as targeted instruction during math RTI time. I was talking to one of our middle school principals earlier today, or actually yesterday, where she was telling me how they're going to start using their data and how they're analyzing their data with the teams and planning for next steps. As a follow-up, I had a conversation with one of our coaches, and then they said the same thing on how teachers are having these conversations about what do I need to do to really pull out and be intentional about what data is telling me to design my next steps. How do we use differentiation training so that we can support students that are at a different level within the same pathway? We definitely need to focus on our priority standards. Most of the schools do have a focus, but how do we really hone in on pulling out sub-skills within those standards that will give the most bang for our buck across content areas? Providing students with strategies so that we can identify information in the word problems and then select the best way to compute So kind of more much like application, but also being able to identify key information. How do I circle, giving them those tools and strategies. Definitely intentional grouping of students based on our formative data. What do I need to reteach? Which standards do I pick for review? When is that review cycle going to be? And what am I going to use to teach and review those standards? There's a need for targeted subgroup instruction during math time and not just ELA. So using our math formative data, math subgroup data to guide small group and targeted instruction during core math blocks. The next few slides we are going to we're going to share a mid-year progress monitoring, if I may say, that's our progress towards our annual typical growth targets. So every year, as students take their diagnostic one, the iReady platform assigns them growth targets that for the year that are based on their individual students' assessment and how they've responded to questions. As they do that, we're seeing some pretty incredible work with our students, with 40% of our students district-wide have already met their target, that annual typical growth target in reading, and 32% in math. We do see Crittenden students have most growth in reading, most students that have already met their target, 55% in reading, and then in math, they are at 44%. Which means students are making progress in math and reading. We just need to be more intentional about subgroup data and use that. When we look at grade level data for progress towards students who have met their annual typical growth, we see that our upper grades, if you see 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, we see they have in reading, 49% of our 6th graders have met their targets. 7th grade, 51%, and 8th graders, 53% of our 8th graders have met their target in reading. Well, in math, we have 48% of our 8th graders that have met their target. So as we think of all of this expansive data that we have, there are some considerations that we have to look at. The assessment the conditions for assessment, what could impact, some things to consider. We've had remote or virtual administration last school year, and this school year we're getting the kids back. It's much like a baseline or a reset year, because we're reorienting our students back after a year and a half of being in virtual learning. And that has impacted our kids. COVID has presented many challenges at not just last year, but this year as well. And there have been challenges due to absences due to COVID-19, especially before we had our on-site testing at our school sites. We also know that instructional time had to be taken away. There's only so many hours in the day. Instructional time had to be taken away to reinforce and practice the COVID and safety protocols. That was time taken away from learning as well, but that was important to make sure our students were safe. But it does have an impact on learning. Subgroup data shows that we have considerable work to be done. We have a need for intentional targeted support across grade levels. Small groups report, RTI, how are we using our time effectively? How are we making sure that our students have time to review and focus and ask questions within the group? How do we rotate the groups as students master standards? How are we providing differentiated core instruction? Some considerations as we're thinking of our assessments. Some other considerations, as we do know, a small percentage of our students didn't finish the assessment. It's pretty similar to the previous years, even after multiple attempts were made. Now, some students finished their assessment after the assessment window, and that data their score may not be reflected in this data report, which could have created some discrepancy in data shared across different timeframes. So you may wonder, what does that mean? Well, with the timing of when the report is pulled for any iReady makes a difference. For example, if the assessment window closed on December 10th and we pulled this, usually reports are pulled within a day or two so that we can share with the parents. But if the student hasn't finished an assessment within the window, could be due to a variety of reasons. May not have the stamina to finish it within the assessment window. Then their score may not have been included in this report. But if you would pull a report now, for example, that student, because they have finished the assessment, their data would be reflected in the data report. It's also possible that certain student groups were given some additional allowances for testing. And now you may wonder what additional allowances for testing would mean. Well, I already recommend some testing times by grade level. And it's been 2 years since our students took the statewide assessment. And now with in-person testing happening after almost a year and a half, we need to build our students' stamina back. And we would like to simulate simulate the assessment environment by using the iReady. Both assessments, iReady and state assessment, CASP, are adaptive. But sometimes sites may give some additional time beyond the testing window to students. So they have some additional allowances that may have been given. With all of that, what are some next steps? What are some things that all of this data, all of the assessment considerations, what are some of our next steps? So I've been meeting with our site leaders one-on-one, and I'm reviewing their data, their site focuses, and instructional next steps. Site leaders are also conducting and having the iReady and other data point review meetings with their staff to see progress towards site goals. And then adjustments will be made in conjunction with staff and school site council on the site plans. We know principals are leading and preparing with their teams to develop a standards review plan in preparation of state testing. How can we increase collaboration and use our principal and coaches PLC time to share data and share best practices? With iReady data that is available, it's also helping our learning recovery coordinator, Ms. Lambert. She is working with our site leadership to revise the learning recovery efforts and revise any student learning plans to support the tutoring during school and after school. As we look at all of these assessment considerations and data for future assessments, we will be pulling a time on task report by subgroup to make sure all of our students have equitable assessment administration. With this mid-year iReady data, well, we're now going to be more intentional and we're going to be consistent with instructional next steps. And with that, I will stop presenting and I am ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dagar. Trustees, does anybody have any questions, clarifying questions for Ms. Dagar? Trustee Berman?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm still wrapping my head around the typical growth and how it's set. So thank you for explaining that. I'm wondering if the typical growth that we want students to meet, is that the growth that they should demonstrate by the time they take the iReady the second time around, so that this time of year, or is it the growth that they should demonstrate by the end of the year?
It's growth that they should demonstrate by the end of the year. So it's annual typical growth. So 1 year within the year next, from diagnostic 1 to end of the year diagnostic.
So when we see those results, we're seeing, 40 to 60% of students already meeting the expected growth for them individually that they should show by the end of the year.
Right.
I see. Got it. Okay. I also noticed, there was a slide about Landel's, Mistral, Therakoff, and Castro declining in proficiency over the years. And my kids go to Mistral, and so I know that there's been a shift in recent years in the model to 50-50, and our math is in Spanish.
Speak up a little.
Sure. Our math is in Spanish. I'm just wondering if you think maybe, and I think that those are all an effort to make sure that there's a balanced language approach at the school. But I'm wondering if you have a sense of how those changes maybe are impacting these scores. I'm sure there's a lot of other data available to demonstrate how much the students are learning in English and in Spanish at the school as well. And I'm curious what your point of view is.
So I have multiple things that I could think of, right? Because it's difficult to pinpoint it. Definitely, like you said, there is a change in the model. It takes time to establish instructional practices and solidify that training that Principal Olasiregi is providing. We are, but they are in the right direction. We also cannot discount that distance learning has an impact on our kiddos. And we know Mistral has a high socioeconomically disadvantaged and a high EL and a high Hispanic Latino. How has that made a difference too? Those are things that you look behind. And like I said, there's a story behind every data point. And what is that story is what we may need to know. I'm happy to ask Ms. Olasiregi to add on this, on what she, if she has something to add. She's here with us.
Good evening, everybody. I can't undo my camera for some reason, but I can do my microphone. So Trustee Lauda, you're absolutely right. We did made some changes in the model. And as we know, we are working with our staff in ensuring that they're getting the professional development so that they can be aligned with our principles of dual immersion. And there was a very important reason why we did change some of the subjects to balance the languages. And it was based on research, a lot of research that has been done throughout the United States on the balance of languages and the appropriate subjects to use in Spanish, because those are the easiest subjects for students to transfer language. So we are working, and we will continue to work on developing the academic vocabulary, especially in the areas of math, so that our students do have that access to apply it. We do use a certain time of our day where we have students work on math and academic language, especially in the use of practice during our iReady.
Thank you, Dr. Olasiregi. My question is more, as we look at this data, I feel like there should maybe be like an asterisk or something, like, let's remember that, these kids are immersed in a language, and, that can have sort of an impact on some of the numbers we see, because that language development takes time. And I've also noticed in some of the schools that were listed and sort of having the declining proficiency, some of them have really significant number of newcomers at their school sites. So when we're looking at students, and I'm assuming newcomers also take the iReady test, is that correct?
No, actually, we don't give them the iReady assessment because they're learning the language, and it is in English. But we do sometimes, for example, I'll give you an example. I spoke to one of our coaches the other day, and she wanted the student to have the writing prompt because they were proficient in their language. So that student was proficient in Spanish, and the teacher wanted the student to be able to express in Spanish. So they changed the writing prompt and gave the rubric to the student in Spanish, and the student was able to express. So we're building opportunities like this for our students, but we don't have them take the iReady assessment necessarily.
It sounds like that makes sense. I don't know that you'd get the data that you're looking for if you put this test in front of them. So thank you. I have a couple of other questions, but I'd love to give the other trustees an opportunity to ask, because there's a good chance we have similar questions.
If we could, Megan Henderson's been looking at some data, and so I think it's probably, we're working on it for a future presentation, but I think it's pretty illustrative about what we're actually seeing. So if we can have her jump in real quick to talk about what we're seeing with Tier 3 data, as well as the difference between students who are reclassified as well as English only. And she's still pulling all this data from the iReady, but it at least gives you some insight into some other things that aren't really shown when you're comparing certain types of data points.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, excellent. So I just kind of want to give you a little idea of what we're going to be looking at a little bit more in the future in terms of a different way of looking at data. So looking obviously at progress with all subgroups is super important. Looking, although, at the gaps between subgroups as well gives us more information. And especially looking at gaps in subgroups over time. one of the interesting things that I looked at today with some of our data was looking at the gaps between our English only students and our students who qualified for reclassification. So the interesting part about looking at that gap is that it's a really good indicator of how our English language development program is preparing our students when they do reclassify. And looking at the gaps over time in our district, they've actually decreased. So we've decreased the gaps between our English only students and our RFEPs over the 3-year period, which is great, right? Because we don't want to see any large persistent gaps. So things like that we're also going to be coming at you with in terms of a different way that we've looked at data before in our district, looking at gaps and looking at them over a prolonged period of time. So I hope that helps
Can you also
illustrate.
Megan, can you also touch base on the tier 3 data that you've looked at across different subgroups and sort of the closing of the gap and the increase in students also?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of ways to look at gaps, the same way that Director Duggar has sliced and diced kind of this data in a lot of different ways. So we look in terms of racial equity, we like to look at the gaps between subgroups with race and ethnicity. And over the last 3 years, the district has actually decreased the gaps between white and Hispanic Latino students by 8%. Which is great. And then also with socioeconomic status, we've actually seen, I believe it was, if I'm remembering it correctly, we've actually seen a double-digit reduction in the gap. It doesn't mean that the gap has disappeared, right? But it does mean that we've made significant progress towards closing the gaps. And it's really important to look at it that way because it also helps kind of carve our way forward, especially when we're applying different interventions. So we're seeing how they're impacting different groups over a different period of time. So we've got a lot of interesting things to share coming up too.
Thank you. Trustee Conley?
Thank you. Director Dagger, thank you so much for your presentation tonight and for the thoroughness of breaking out the subgroup data by school site. That was really helpful to see. I'm wondering if, my assumption, given that our Latino population has been disproportionately impacted by COVID in terms of case rates, hospitalization rates, and death rates, my guess is that there is also a higher number of absences of students due to COVID impacts across our district who are Latino. Is that accurate?
I'll have to look into that. I have not done a comparative study with absences yet, but we can definitely look into that and get that data out as well.
Okay, and then a question I had was around, so we've started these after-school intervention programs. We know that we have the most students enrolled in the learning recovery programs at Castro and Mistral, but those programs just got off the ground at the end of November. So they didn't make it in time for this diagnostic. How long do we anticipate those programs running this spring?
I can ask, we have Coordinator Lambert, she and I were collaborating about this just this morning.
Good evening. The longevity of the programs, it varies a little bit by grade and by agency, but they should run through April. FEV will probably make it into May with the amount that we contracted.
So roughly 4 months for some students and 5 months for others?
Roughly. It depends on their attendance, of course, and usage. So it may last longer if usage is lower, shorter amount of time if usage is higher.
Thank you.
Trustee Wheeler?
Yeah, so I have two kind of bigger questions. So one is regarding middle school math, so specifically 8.2. I'm remembering last year, near the end of the school year, but maybe around this time, there was a fair amount of worry expressed by parents of high-level math students about why are we going to be doing just one period of math for 8.2 this year instead of 2 periods? And, you assured us that, with the instruction plan that we had, that these students were going to do fine. And I want to check my understanding with you, because it seems to me, looking at these scores for 8.2 math students, that they are indeed doing fine. So the single period of math, and however students, dig into that at home, has been sufficient. What can you share with us?
Well, you are right. We did have that conversation towards the end of the year, and I'd shared all of the data and the research and seeing the score growth. We do see comparable scores at both of our middle schools for higher math pathways, including 8.2, 7.2. I do have to say that having in-person one period where it says is so much more effective as well, because you're able to really teach the kids and get their attention. It's completely different from virtual teaching, right? Also, our teachers are now getting trained in differentiation, right? And now they're using those, because within the same, within 8.22, there's students at different levels. We really need to identify those needs and address their needs to keep challenging them and to their potential, their best potential, right? And at middle schools, I have to give credit and kudos to both of our middle school principals and our middle school coaches. They're all working towards developing the small group instruction within the core classes. That is something that we know makes a difference, because you can teach a big lesson and that to the whole group, and then you see some students are not responding the way you want them to, or at the level you want, and you can really within that time pull them back. I think there's so much more that we're doing that is helping make a difference. I'm happy to call on both of our middle school principals as well, if they'd like to chime in if I have missed anything, because they're on the grounds with this.
I just want to add one thing to Ms. Dagger, what she said. I think it's important to see that our teachers really at the beginning of the year were trying to figure out how to do this, right, with just one period. But they really embraced the idea of looking back our pacing guides and really our priority standards and thinking about how do we make this work. And so, they came into thinking about, do we do small group instruction, and when do we do it? When does it make sense? And how do we group our students? So I definitely say, and during POC time, that's one of the focuses we have too. Crittenden is thinking about how do we know our students are learning, how do we enrich our students, and how do we also support our students who are not meeting the learning target. So I would definitely say our teachers are consistently looking and adjusting their pacing guide, looking at their summative assessments, their formative assessments in the classroom to see what, again, is going well and what things to improve on. So I definitely say give kudos to our teachers for definitely taking this on, this new change of one period and doing it beautifully.
Yeah, I would like to agree with Ms. Gomez and say our teachers did a great job of looking at those essential standards. We're in close contact with our high school district, with their math instructional coach, Marcy, and we meet with them. We talk about standards. We talk about what their expectations are at the high school. So yeah, they've been doing a great job, because, the standards were not meant to be written so we can teach every one of them. We couldn't. There's some ridiculous number. If we taught every standard, it would take, 25 years or something. I just made that up, but they're doing a great job figuring out what is essential and what isn't and differentiating for it. So yeah, I absolutely agree with Sonia and Swati.
Thank you. And I have just an observation, and I'd like to hear your impression of it, Ms. Dagger. So I had never heard the statement that you made about English language learners needing to hear a word 3,000 times for it to stick with them. That's the first time I've ever heard that. So it was fascinating to me. And then what it connected in my mind is the famous study of entering kindergarten students. You know, this is a study from some number of years ago, saying that different working group class students, households, come to school with different levels of vocabulary. So specifically, the headline for that study was similar to what you just said about words for English learners, which is students from professional households come to kindergarten knowing 3,000 more words than other students, so that they start way ahead. So I don't know, have you ever, made any kind of correlation about that or heard of any studies connecting those two things?
I have not, and I have not heard of that study, but it is said, we know, I'm an English learner myself, right? The more exposure we give to our kids to practice, the more they hear it. And this is like language development for any student, not just our English learners, but any student. The more exposure they have to reading and the same words, the more we practice, the better we retain it. So I have not made a correlation to that study, but I'll definitely have to look into that because you intrigued my interest. You really did.
May I chime in for a moment? And then I'll come back to you, Trustee Conley. Going back to the math and the effective use of differentiation in the upper grade or in the upper level math courses, it seems like we still have a lot of work to do in the basic math courses. And I'm wondering, are the teachers also using differentiated instruction there? And I'm wondering if there's more differentiated groups in those levels that get clustered together, and whether that would be an effective tool at that level as well.
So I can start by saying this is the first year that we're really training our teachers in providing differentiation training. And differentiation is not a tool that you can give. Differentiation is an approach to teaching. So having that shift from when I have students within my group, it may be at any level that could be 2 grade levels behind or 1 grade level behind or 3 grade levels above. How do I use that same standard and I pull those skills from that standard, pull the main thing that we want our students to know and walk away with from that standard? How do I use that? And then how do I design support for each one of my kiddos without, I'd have to say this, it's a lot of planning that goes into designing supports. How do I cluster my kids? How do I make those groups? I think that this is the first year we've started really intentionally thinking about this differentiation training and providing them this training. So we'll definitely see more improvement and implementation. Our site principals are providing feedback. Our coaches are providing feedback. They are discussing at the coaches PLC, at our coaches meeting that we meet monthly. We talk about how we're seeing differentiation and the training being used at the site. What do our coaches need to do to support? What do they need to do to model? So I think it's a shift that we're seeing. And definitely the results of this will show soon. We're hopeful.
And so the differentiation training is at all levels. It's not just for, okay, good. Thank you. That was my question.
All grades, all of our teachers, TK to 8th grade, got that.
Thank you. Trustee Conley.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that. So Trustee Wheeler, I think you're referencing the 30 million word gap. So that study was about 40 years ago. And since then, there has been, especially in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, some lively discussion about the validity of the study and the findings. There were only 42 families included in it. Only 29 of those families were actually tracked when the students entered elementary school. And so there are concerns that the study was too limited, that there were racial biases that played out in how the study was conducted. So it's not, I think, I remember coming through teacher credentialing and learning about it, and it felt like established fact. And more recently, there's been a closer look at whether or not it's an actual valid comparison point for children.
Interesting. Were there any other questions from trustees before I open it up to members of the public? Okay, if there are any members of the public on the phone wishing to speak on the iReady Diagnostic 2 assessment data overview, please raise your hand or press *9 if you are on the phone. Okay, I see one member of the public, trustee Nelson. I'm sorry, former trustee Nelson. Mr. Nelson, I think Dr. Rudolph is putting up the timer, and once that's up, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you. Mr.
Can
Nelson,
you hear
are
me
you
now?
there? Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes. I used to get called Honorable Nelson by one of the former presidents. I sent you something yesterday, the trustees, and the presenter. This is about the issue of using these metrics to look at what the gaps are doing. But I agree with the Director of Equity that that's an interesting set of arithmetic to look at. But here's what I found, is the achievement gap, white minus Hispanic, is actually increased from this latest D2 measurement. If you go to page 20 and look at the things for comparative reading, here's what you'll notice at D2. Now, 76% of the whites are above grade average. That's a proficiency. And only 29% of the Hispanic. So if you take 76 minus 29% and you do your mental math the right way, you get 46 plus 1, because 30, you get 47% proficiency gap. Go look at what the previous information I sent you on the D2 results, D1 results were. It was 35%. At the beginning of this year, the same metric, and it was 35% 2 years ago in 2019, the D1, the proficient gap. So it's gone from 35% proficient gap to now 46%. Do your mental math. That's a 12% increase in the gap. 12 over 35 is about a third. Almost 1/3 increase in the reading achievement gap between the D1 averages in 2019 and 21 and the D2 average now. In math, white minus Hispanic, a 1/4 increase in the achievement gap in math. That also is not a small gap, that's a 50% gap now. Gap in the proficiencies. The academic achievement gap, Asian minus Hispanic, almost a 1/12 increase in reading achievement gap. Math, Asian minus Hispanic, almost a 1/7 increase in the achievement gap for math. And the last that I did in this one was the academic achievement gap for English speakers, or EO, minus the English learners. In math, there was a decrease. It was a 1/10 decrease in the academic achievement gap for math. So it decreased from about 58% gap to 55% gap, 69% minus 14%. So looking at what the gaps is doing, you're not meeting some of these equity requirements that you say you're putting on yourself. You should be increasing.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. If you have additional comments for the board, please send them to us by email. Okay, trustees, comments, insights? Trustee Chang, you didn't get a chance to speak earlier.
Thank you. I really appreciated hearing about the instructional strategies that are being done at different schools and how that is impacting the scores. The one conversation I think would be interesting for us as a board and as a district to talk more about is the impact on impact of race. Because
Can you
sure.
speak up a little more?
Yeah,
I'm having trouble.
Let me move this closer then.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that, like this discussion of instructional strategies and how that's improved scores. But the one area I keep thinking about, especially because we just had that board retreat about race and biases and things like that, is that I think we could talk more about race and how that's impacting our scores, and the fact that it is still true that when you have segregated school settings, it leads to segregated academic outcomes. And it stood out to me when I was looking at the report and the presentation that, like, when we look at Castro's student demographics, it predicted the iReady scores of how many students were below grade level. If you looked at EMI and Bub's demographics, it predicted how many students were above grade level. And it's not anything to do about like potential tied by race, but it has to do with a segregated outcome. Because when you look at Castro, it was also the school where white students performed the worst on iReady at Castro. So it wasn't just Latino students at Castro, the few white students at Castro also, that was the lowest. And Latino students performed the highest at EMI. So, and Latino students performed generally better in any of our more diverse schools. So there's something there that I think that we need to have further conversations about. And there's a lot of good research we can look at. I've been looking at it this week and prepared for this meeting. So there's a Berkeley professor, Rucker Johnson, who has been doing a lot of research on integration, because like integration, like a lot of times we think of that as something that stops the busing. We think about Boston in our movie. And what Rucker Johnson was trying to remind us is that like integration stopped not because it wasn't successful. Integration stopped because it wasn't politically digestible. But in fact, he found that places that continue to pursue goals that have integrated schools continue to have better graduation rates and better performance for all students, for disadvantaged students. And in addition to that, white students do not perform less well off. So if you look at our iReady scores confirm that. Like in iReady scores, white students don't perform dramatically different, or Asian students also at our diverse schools or our less diverse Bub and EMIs. So like diversity didn't hurt white and Asian students. And I think that was something that was lost in the integration discussions of 30, 40 years ago. But there's a lot of research that shows now that like integrated schools help disadvantaged kids, and it doesn't hurt advantaged kids. And then beyond that, there was also an interesting study. I think we would appreciate this given our commitment to reduce racial bias. Professor at Chicago, Luca Merlino, said that that diverse schools have reduced racial bias among white students. And I think we've been looking at that when we look at the work of schools like Vargas. And if one wants to, one ask person more locally, Peter Bergman has been a professor focusing his work on Palo Alto Unified. And some of you are familiar with Palo Alto Unified's long work of integrating EPA schools to Palo Alto. And he found there too that when the students, the siblings who got, because it was a lottery system for this, I don't know if you guys are familiar, that some kids go to Menlo Atherton, some kids go to Palo Alto High School when the East Palo Alto, and some elementary school kids can go to Menlo Park schools. And so it's those kids siblings who got integrated, they performed better. So like, I think that there's just something there that we should, in addition to look at instructional strategy, we should just bear and have like a straight conversation about that our school that is segregated is having segregated outcomes regardless of pedagogical strategies. And yeah, just look forward to us talking about that.
Thank you, Trustee Chang. Trustee Conley?
Oh, I forgot that my light was on. Sorry. I hear you, Trustee Chang, and I'm glad that we as a board have put forward direction that we want to continue those discussions. And when we were looking at our lottery system for our choice schools, I know it came up around down the line boundaries and impacts on schools. So I think that is a discussion worth having. I also know that as I said earlier, our Latino population has been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and that impact, they're still being impacted. They're, especially with the Omicron surge, but also with Delta, it's not as though a switch was flipped in August and everything went back to normal for children. We did get them back to school, but many families have still experienced illness, loss, unemployment, lack of housing, hunger, all kinds of things continuing through this school year. And I think that really does impact academic achievement as well. And so we have a real urgency. I've always felt urgent about the achievement gap in our district, but that urgency is multiplied by the disproportionate losses that our Latino population has faced in Mountain View. And I'm glad that we have the after school to learning recovery program that we're doing right now, both after school and in school, to try and catch students up. But I think this isn't a problem that we're going to dig ourselves out of in one school year, especially with the pandemic still with us. I think it's going to take considerable amount of time, investment, and energy. I hope we start talking about summer school. I hope we start talking about continued after school programming in the future. I think this is going to be ongoing work that's going to take a while to correct.
Thank you, Trustee Conley. Trustee Berman?
So I completely agree with my two fellow trustees that have shared. So I won't restate what their comments are, but I completely agree. Something I noticed, I feel like the successes and the opportunities for growth slides are really spot on in terms of what needs to come next. And in our conversations, I know that this board is really committed to equity, and we understand that equity means that you provide extra support to the communities, to the students, the families that need it the most. And our data is very clear that we have a demographic that is significant in our district that is being disproportionately impacted, has been impacted. And I fear that we're going to continue to see this. And because we should look at this through the lens of equity, I think about, these things that we want to look at. We want to talk about summer school. We want to talk about, what is going on there. As Trustee Chang said, what is going on? I know that when we looked at site plans, I feel like most or all of the site plans did mention, a lot of the focus on RTI and vocabulary, but there's barriers there that keep certain students or schools from having the outcomes that maybe other schools have. So I agree that, there's something going on, and I think that we need to invest the time as a board on a board level to think about how we're going to support our Hispanic Latino students, our SED students, no, I'm getting too close, our SED students, so that we do our work as a board to provide the funds, the resources to prioritize those things to help our students succeed. And we also make sure that we include our families through it because our families have also been incredibly traumatized by what's happened with COVID. And we need to make sure that they understand what this data means and what we need to see them as partners in education. So I think making sure that we're able to communicate with them. And I know that there's a lot of bright stars in our district. There's teachers that are doing super work with, this demographic as well. And there's schools across, our state that are great examples of what this work looks like. And I think about how, I think as a board, there were school visits to see the immersion, the language immersion schools, the dual immersion schools. I think there was a trip to San Diego. So it just made me think, what are the exemplars of, some practices, some models of how that we should sort of think about that maybe we're not thinking about to better serve this community. So I'll just close by saying I think that somehow as a board, I think spending more time with the word that's in here at the end is intentionality, with the same intentionality to look at our policies and really set our students up for success and prioritizing the resources that our students need. So I'm not really sure what the next step is. I feel like sometimes the meetings end and then we'll get the next set of data in a few months. So I just, I want to make sure that there's a plan. I'm really excited to see some of the data. It sounds like there's more data coming for us to look at, so we can think about our RFEP and Yale students and the success that we might be seeing there. So I just want to make sure that we actually continue those conversations.
Thank you. I would also just like to add, it's not just about money. We have been spending a lot more money on Castro School in particular for a long time. And I'm glad to see that things are improving, but I too am frustrated by the gaps. I mean, I think we all are, our families and our community are, but I am also really glad that we're really now digging into the data and working with the instructional coaches to really parse it out, kind of piece by piece and strategy by strategy, and working, the differentiation. I've been hearing about differentiation for 15, 20 years, but it is difficult to implement, but really taking, this kid needs this and that kid needs that. And like Ms. Degar said, trying to, find the right small group so that you work with the right kids and the right skills. And all those other pieces. I mean, I agree with what the rest of you have said too. But I'm just hopeful. I felt like we were really poised to kind of start making really good gains, and then COVID happened. And it sort of derailed everything. And now, we were very fortunate due to the hard work of so many teachers and staff and our families to not experience the learning loss. There have been some slight decreases, as was pointed out in the data here, but nothing like what happened across many other districts in our country. So I'm grateful for that. But I'm now ready to get back to that place where we're poised to take off. And I'm hopeful that with some of these strategies and things that we're implementing in the coaches and just the work classroom by classroom and grade level by grade level, that we will start to see some of those gains. And bringing the families in, the data about the kindergarten was really interesting to me, that it was so much higher. And it must be that, it must be the parents, as well as the teachers and staff. But when you looked at the first grade data, because those kindergartners last year are now first graders, they were kind of clustered. I mean, they were still doing better than some of the older kids, but they didn't keep those gains into first grade, which I thought was interesting. So those are my comments. I'm cautiously optimistic. Oh, Trustee Conley, you had some more.
No, I appreciate you reminded me that the thing I forgot to do was to thank our staff and teachers, Director Dagger, and the entire team in the district office as well, for all of the hard work that has gone into, in many instances, maintaining learning growth across the pandemic. It is easy for me to focus on this one problem area because it's urgent and it needs attention, but there is also some remarkable work, not just going on with those students, but all of our students in the district. And so I thank you for your reminder, President Blakely, to stop and recognize all of that hard work by our teachers and celebrate it.
We can't do that often enough.
Yeah.
Trustee Berman.
I also had one final thing to add, and I made a note of it earlier. There are districts across our country that don't engage in this level of data analysis, and they definitely don't do it with their school boards. So I think just looking at this data together and being able to have this open, honest conversation and really look into how our students and our schools are doing, I think that is going to make us a more effective school district. So I'm just so grateful that we are able to look at all of these data points together in this level of presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, trustees? I had one other question, Dr. Rudolph. I cannot remember the name of the educator. It's a woman, and I think she has 2 last names, and she came and presented at Graham just before COVID happened. And she's made great strides with some of our, with lower socioeconomic and language learners. And I saw that she's coming back and is going to be doing a training for both teachers and then the session for parents. I think maybe Director Chang, you were putting that on. If you could remind us about that event.
I think you're talking about Kate Kinsella, Dr. Kate
Yes,
Kinsella.
Kate Kinsella, that's it.
Yes.
Okay, one last name. And when are those sessions that will be offered? Do you have the dates handy?
Not off the top of my head, I'll take a look. I know that actually the effort is being spearheaded by 3 of our site principals. So just to give them credit, but yeah, I think it's a great event and a good opportunity for us to listen to some best practices.
Thank you. I was just thinking for parents, please keep an eye on your newsletters because she's really just incredibly effective strategies that she's developed with kids, in particular language learners. And so the fact I was really interested to see that we were going to be hosting some sort of session for parents as well, so that parents could then take that learning and maybe implement it at home to help their kids. So just excited to see that when you brought up families and involving them.
Yeah, actually, Miss Siam, do you happen to know, Arlene's on here. Do you happen to know off the top of your head? I'm looking it up right now, just so that we can get it out in the public of the date.
It's February 3rd.
Awesome, I just found it too. Thank you, 5:30. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Dagar, and all the rest of the team who chimed in to help answer questions and provide more context for us this evening. We really appreciate the work that you're doing, and shout out to all you teachers too. So we'll move on to item number 7, board updates. Does anybody have any updates? Trustee Conley?
Yes, I have 2 quick updates. One is that next week I'll be going down to Southern California for the California School Board Association's Board of Directors meeting. It's a 4-day session, and I think we'll be talking about not just strategic planning for CSBA, but also state legislation that could impact our district. So I'm hoping to come back with some good information to share with our board and also as regional director for Region 20, Santa Clara County here. And then secondly, tomorrow morning, I wanted to say thank you so Leadership Mountain View is having their education day tomorrow. I'm going to give a short presentation on just the breakdown of the different districts in the area. And then we have an education panel that Dr. Rudolph and Principal Galassi are going to participate in, as well as educational leaders from other schools and districts. So looking forward to that tomorrow morning.
Terrific. Thank you all for your participation. Any other board updates? I know that several of us provide them routinely to Nancy for inclusion in the packages. All right, the next item is item number 8, items for future agendas. Dr. Rudolph?
I didn't have any email to me, that's all.
Okay. Moving right along, then we're at item 9, future board meeting dates. And those are in the agenda. February 10th is our next regular meeting, and then March 10th, and then March 24th and April 7th. And did we confirm a date for our board retreat yet, Dr. Rudolph?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's on my to-do list to talk to you though about.
Keep an eye out for that so that we can all get it on our calendars. So
President Blakely, there is a hand raised, and I don't know if it was one of the items that we just went through.
Thank you for holding me to task. I see if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on any of these last items that we just talked about, board updates, items for future agendas, and future board meeting dates, will you please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9? And I see one hand. It is Mr. Nelson. Please unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes. Mr. Nelson, are you there?
Sounds like I'm unmuted. Yes, I wanted to make a comment on future board meeting dates. I sent you something, Madam President, about what the California School Boards Association governance improvement training does, and many of their trainers say a wonderful board governance calendar that I know was produced, I think sometime in the last year, be included on a monthly basis on that thing of when future meetings are, or items for future meetings, because the board governance calendar will remind people when different things are going to be scheduled to become up months in advance. And it's a good place for the public to know, well, what can I expect next meeting, or the meeting after that, or the meeting after that, or, in June of this year. So I would urge you, I sent you a private email, but I would urge the rest of the board to think about that good governance idea that the California School Boards Association board trainers have suggested to improve board governance, and how easy it is for the public to see what may be coming up that they're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you. And at 8:21, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, trustees.